Now, I think let's start by understanding what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to the home loan application process.
I think one of the biggest mistakes is that a home buyer doesn't necessarily understand what the bank looks at in order to justify the affordability of the application. I think also going one step before even looking or signing an offer to purchase is understanding what that client qualifies for. Many home buyers don't necessarily know how much they could qualify for, and going in blindly looking at properties that they may not necessarily be able to afford. So affordability is one. Secondly is when an application is ready to go into the bank, give the bank what they want in order for them to make a decision based on affordability and based on the information they have at hand.
Now, what are the banks looking for?
So there's really two elements that the banks look at. The one is what we call a return to income. So your bond repayment cannot exceed more than 30% of your gross monthly income, that being individual or joint income.
Okay.
The second one is, does the client have enough money at the end of the month to be able to afford the bond repayment? So that's taking into account their contractual debt, taking into account their household expenses, and do they have enough at the end of the month to be able to afford the bond repayment?
Now, many people go directly to their bank when they want to apply for a home loan. That's not necessarily the cleverest move, am I right?
Absolutely not. And the reason for that is because you want to get comparable quotes. You want to understand what another bank is prepared to offer you. And how do you know that another bank is not really going to give you a better deal if you haven't shopped that deal? It's the biggest transaction you'll ever have. Your bank may not necessarily give you the best deal.
Justin, you are a bond originator. What exactly is your role during the home loan application process?
The most important is to understand the client's affordability and to guide a home buyer or a potential home buyer through the application process. So we are a multiple bank submission facility where we complete one application, compile the supporting documentation, ensure that the supporting documentation substantiates the application to the banks, and submits the application to all the banks simultaneously. So when a home buyer decides that they want to go to the banks directly, they've literally got to go and stand in queues or make appointments with bankers where we do it in a simultaneous submission.
So that person literally gets his application to 4 different banks by dealing with one person.
Correct.
What are some of the other benefits of going through a bond originator? I would imagine that you can also motivate on behalf of that home buyer.
Absolutely. Home loans is what we do every day. We understand exactly what the banks require. So we know how to package a deal to the banks in order to get the best possible deal for the client. So we would never do a submission to the bank if we're not happy with what we're supplying to the bank. We will ensure that we have all the correct information and be confident that when we submit that application that we would ultimately get an approval.
Now, you actually want to get in contact with your bond originator before you even start house hunting.
Absolutely.
And that's for a pre-approval. Talk to us about that. And what exactly is a pre-approval certificate?
Perfect. So pre-approval certificate or an affordability indicator. So what that means is that we need to understand what the client can qualify for, as I said previously. And one of there's a few things that we need to understand. Firstly, what is the client's bureau score? Have they managed their existing contractual debt correctly so that they don't have defaults or judgments? And needing to understand what the client's contractual debt obligations are on a monthly basis. So when we do an affordability indicator or a pre-qualification, we will do a credit check on the client to look at their bureau score. We'll understand what their contractual debt is. We will then ask the client to give us an outline of their income, gross and net expenses, and we would then be able to analyze what the client can afford based on the information provided.
So now you've given the client a pre-approval certificate. Let's say they can now go and shop for 2 million rand. They go out house hunting, they make an offer, it gets accepted. what happens now in terms of the whole home loan application process?
So what's really great, if the client has already done the pre-approval and we have all the supporting documentation, we are able to immediately submit that application to the banks once we receive the offer to purchase. But I think let's go through the application process. So we have an application completed, we have all the supporting documentation. The application then gets submitted to the banks. The application it goes through what we call a scorecard. Each bank has a scorecard that would determine whether the bank is happy to have a credit manager assess the application. And what the scorecard dictates is the likes of can the client afford it on the application and what the client's bureau score is. Once the application has been vetted and scorecard is happy, it then moves through to a credit manager. A credit manager would assess the application and ensure that they are happy with the affordability. Once credit is happy with the affordability, the banks will then issue what we call an approval in principle, subject to valuation. The valuator will then go out and assess the property, and if the valuator is happy with the value of the property, we then receive a final grant. At the end of the day, and hopefully we receive 4 bank grants, which we then present to the home buyer, and it's their choice as to which bank they choose to proceed with.
And you can also negotiate on that home buyer's behalf with the banks.
We negotiate all the time. We don't want the home buyer to speak to the bank at all. We'll do it on their behalf.
Now, from the point where the home buyer gets his pre-approval certificate, up to the point where he actually applies for the home loan, is there anything that can sort of jeopardize him getting approved for that home loan?
So the biggest thing is that if people take additional credit and increase their contractual obligations, that could definitely affect the application when we do the submission to the banks. And sometimes, unfortunately, people's employment changes. They may be retrenched in the process, which hopefully never happens, or they've had a reduction in their salary. But one of the biggest things is please don't go and get additional debt when purchasing a property, because that could definitely negatively
Don't
affect.
go buy that car.
No, try not to, please. Unless you can afford it.
Now, Justin, just in closing, the services of a bond originator is free.
Correct.
Now, we all know there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Sure.
Is there a catch here?
Absolutely not. The banks rely on us to give them the opportunity to register a bond with them. And they have outsourced that to the mortgage originators. So the mortgage originators in turn give us a referral fee for the registration of that bond.
So you get paid by the banks, it doesn't get added to the home loan, the client is really getting a free service from a bond originator.
A free service and a better service, knowing that they're getting the best possible deal on their home loan.
That's great. Justin, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming through.
Thank you, Cornelius. Thank you.